Growing pressure from hospitals and health professionals urging junior doctors in England to drop their planned strikes. Senior bodies say the NHS won't be able to cope. Junior doctors say the government's unworkable contracts are to blame.
Every doctor agrees that this contract, as part of the 7-day plan as they stand, is not safe to proceed.
How will Theresa May respond in her first major challenge as Prime Minister? Also on News at 10 tonight. A serving Royal Marine Commando is remanded in custody, charged with terror-related offences. Banned. The tiny beads of plastic in our beauty products will be phased out by the end of this year. And with just 5 days to go before the Paralympics, we meet a tennis player dreaming of adding 2 gold medals to his Wimbledon success.
This is ITV News at 10 with Raghi Omar.
Good evening. It would be fair to say at the start of the dispute that junior doctors enjoyed the support of most of their colleagues and quite a number of their patients too, who felt they were right to be taking on the government for trying to impose a strict new contract. But tonight, with a significant compromise rejected and 4 5-day strikes in the pipeline, much of that sympathy, at least from health professionals, appears to be waning. Frontline NHS leaders in England say the strike will risk patient safety. The Patients Association wants the Prime Minister to intervene. And even members of the BMA Council who called the strikes are split in their support. But tonight, junior doctors are standing firm, and so is the government, who, as things stand, still plan to force the new contract upon them.
First, it was the Academy of the Medical Royal Colleges, now the NHS Confederation and NHS providers representing hospital bosses say that whatever the merits of their case, junior doctors should call off their action. In a strongly worded letter to the BMA, they urged them to call off a series of strikes due to start in 10 days' time, which they said were disproportionate. With barely any notice for trusts to prepare, the employers' organisations wrote, this unprecedented level of strike action will cause major disruption and risk patient safety.
All we're saying is that the consequences that we're worried about are 125,000 cancelled operations and 1 million lost outpatient appointments that, to be frank, the NHS simply can't cope with at this point. And that's why we're saying to junior doctors, please think very, very carefully and please reconsider.
Currently, full walkouts are going ahead between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. from the 12th to the 16th of September, from the 5th to the 7th and the 10th to 11th of October, then from the 14th to the 18th of November and between the 5th and 9th of December. But why is there such discontent? Junior doctors say the new contract was missold as being about a 7-day NHS, when it was really about stretching the workforce more thinly.
Jeremy Hunt has treated junior doctors like children. He has treated them in the most demoralising way possible. He has not listened to these experts in patient safety who look after patients every day.
But you're really pushing it now, aren't you, going ahead with these all-out strikes?
Whatever they've said about industrial action, every doctor agrees that this contract, as part of the 7-day plan as they stand, is not safe to proceed.
The Health Secretary himself wouldn't comment today.
What are you going to do about that?
But he and the Prime Minister are also facing pressure to resolve the dispute. The Patients Association saying Mrs May should pause the imposition of the contract.
We would like her to do what she did with Hinkley Point, for example, and take time to think about it, look at it in real detail and find out from patients and perhaps other members of staff in the health service what needs to be done.
Patients may sympathise with the junior doctors, but increasingly they may feel what needs to be done is for the two sides to get together again and resolve this acrimonious dispute.
And Libby is here with me in the studio. Libby, calls there for Theresa May to intervene, but whether she does or not, this is a huge test for her at the start of her premiership.
It is indeed. I mean, when she was choosing the people who would sit in her cabinet, she didn't know that the members of the British Medical Association were actually going to reject the offer that was on the table. And in fact, the leadership of the BMA had said that they should accept it. So she did reappoint Jeremy Hunt as Health Secretary. And I'm told that when he walked up Downing Street, he was very cautious. He didn't use that NHS lapel badge. He didn't wear it as he normally would. I'm told there were cheers in hospitals around the country when they saw that. They thought that he was going to be fired. Yeah. He was gone. When he emerged and he'd been reappointed and he was wearing it, there were sort of looks of horror on people's faces because they really, really do not like the way he's handled this dispute. You heard that junior doctor in my piece there saying that he had treated them like children. I think that's a very widely held view. They think that having looked at the details of the contract, this isn't a very generous offer. And they've also looked at their basic pay. And the basic pay of people who are newly qualified as junior doctors is just £23,000 a year. I think when they are looking at that and have been looking at the fine print, at whatever is an offer in terms of a pay rise, they are extremely unhappy. And I think that perhaps if Theresa May had appointed a new health secretary, there would have been some sense that everyone could move on. But I think with him still in place, there's still a lot of anger there, and that perhaps explains why they've decided on this course of action.
And briefly, that both sides really entrenched in their extreme positions with no sense that they could bridge that gap.
Well, that's how it seems tonight, but I think the pressure really is on both sides now to get back round the table. I think this would be hugely disrupting for patients and for hospitals. You've heard what the managers have been saying. It could endanger patients' lives, and I think that's something that neither the doctors nor the government want to see. OK,
Libby, thank you very much indeed for that. A serving Royal Marine appeared in court this afternoon accused of a whole range of terror offences linked to Northern Ireland. Kieran Maxwell allegedly made bombs, stashed weapons at several different locations and compiled a library of terrorism documents. It's believed his arrest was linked to a police investigation into Irish Republican dissidents.
An investigation that began in Northern Ireland and spread to the southwest of England, involving 5 separate police forces and the discovery of explosives hidden in woodland as far apart as County Antrim and here in Devon, led to the appearance of a serving Royal Marine in court today. 30-year-old Kieran Maxwell, originally from Ulster but now based in Devon, is charged with a string of terror offences. The Royal Marine Commando is accused of researching an act of terrorism, purchasing and obtaining chemicals and components concerned with terrorism, and manufacturing and constructing explosive devices. He's also alleged to have created hides in England and Northern Ireland to store explosives, ammunition and weapons. It was the discovery of concealed bomb-making equipment in 2 country parks in County Antrim earlier this year that began an investigation into what was believed to be dissident Republican activity. Explosives, timers, detonators and other material used in the construction of bombs was discovered hidden in barrels. The Royal Marine, originally from Larne in County Antrim, was not asked to enter a plea in a brief appearance today. He spent less than 3 minutes in court. Unusually, Kieran Maxwell is now being taken to a police station and not to prison while his alleged offences are being investigated. But he'll be back here before the courts on Monday. Paul Davis, News at 10.
Barely a week after MPs called for a ban on the tiny plastic microbeads found in so many beauty products, it appears the government is now going to impose one. As many as 100,000 beads can be washed down the plug hole and into the ocean every time you shower, poisoning marine life. But in the morning, details of a clampdown will be announced. But the question is, does the ban go far enough?
Without you even knowing it, they may be part of your daily routine. Tiny plastic microbeads used in many toiletries and cosmetics, but which can end up in our seas as a hazard to aquatic life. Tonight, campaigners welcome the new backing for a ban.
Well, it's fantastic news that the government has listened to the public, to MPs, to academics and to NGOs and responded by launching this consultation. I haven't seen the details yet, but obviously what we're hoping for is that this is a comprehensive ban.
MPs were told that a single shower can result in 100,000 plastic particles entering the ocean. Tonight, government has backed a legal ban on the microbeads in cosmetics and toiletries. This should be in place by the end of 2017. The aim is to cut around 680 tonnes of plastic microbeads used in the UK every year. When ITV News filmed on a marine research vessel just last week, our experiment revealed the scale of this problem.
I'm here to find out just how widespread they are in our seas.
This tube collects seawater to be checked under a microscope for plastic pollution.
Straight away we can see a couple of microbeads there. Another one down
These
here.
circles show how even in one small sample of seawater, microbeads are present. But experts warn that they're only up to 4% of total marine plastic pollution. Today, Caroline Lucas was elected co-leader of the Green Party, and tonight she called for action on microbeads to go much further.
What they need to do now is urgently look at ways of getting rid of wider plastics in our seas, at the same time as conducting more research, I think, into the health impacts of plastics in our seas.
Some firms had already made voluntary commitments to ban microbeads to help save our seas, but implementation dates differed. Tonight, campaigners say that creating big environmental strides can start with even this micro step. Chris Choi, News at 10.
When Theresa May lands in China this weekend for the G20 Leaders Summit, she might not be afforded the sort of welcome offered to her predecessor. One of her first acts as Prime Minister was to put on hold plans for the new nuclear power plant at Hinkley Point, approved by David Cameron and funded in part by the Chinese. It might mean some awkward questions when she arrives for the first such summit to be held in the country.
China takes great pride in hosting the G20 summit, a chance for the country to show it has arrived as a global superpower. Delegates being greeted with a full red carpet and military welcome. For President Xi, seen here greeting the leader of Indonesia, this is a defining moment in his leadership. And so too could it be for Britain's relationship with China. The Prime Minister will take her place among the world leaders arriving in Hangzhou, trying to prevent a Chinese chill turning into a freeze.
After Brexit, the UK will be less sexy, okay? So you need to make your efforts to attract foreign investment from anywhere, including from China.
Theresa May's decision to pause for thought on the Hinkley nuclear power plant has antagonised the world's second biggest economy. The Chinese particularly angered by a suggestion it was due to national security concerns.
When within weeks of entering number 10, Theresa May put the brakes on the Hinkley Point nuclear project, she was deemed to have tarnished the so-called golden era in UK-China relations. She has since written to President Xi and said she hoped for constructive talks at this weekend's summit. A letter described in state media here as grovelling.
China is set to invest £100 billion in the UK by 2025. That includes £6 billion for the Hinkley nuclear project, creating 25,000 jobs, and a possible £12 billion to help construct the HS2 high-speed rail line. In Manchester, £800 million has already been invested in a business park at the city's airport, generating more than 11,000 jobs. The Beijing company involved in that project wants reassurances from the Prime Minister before they spend any more.
We would like to hear, as a company who invested in UK, that her views and her visions of the future of UK, and also to reassure our investment is safe, and also the relationship between the two countries will continue to be good.
At this G20, hosted by China, Theresa May looks set to get a tough introduction to international diplomacy. Debbie Edward, News at 10, Hangzhou.
Well, Angus Walker's here. Angus, do you think that Theresa May is going to get anything of a red carpet or pretty much a cold shoulder?
Downing Street must be catering for a lukewarm reception because it's such a change of tone since Theresa May put Hinckley on ice. Remember George Osborne and the talk of a golden era. I remember being in Beijing and embassy officials coming up to me offering exclusive access with George Osborne at a nuclear power station. Well, Theresa May is not going to be visiting a nuclear power station in China. Remember, the Chinese do have a history of throwing an almighty sulk when they want to. David Cameron, her predecessor, frozen out for 18 months for meeting the Dalai Lama. It's not unheard of for British ministers to be shouted at. I know of one embassy official who was told by his counterpart, "We don't need to impress you." So it's
her letter being described as grovelling. I mean,
yes,
the Chinese
and
media.
It's not just the Queen who thinks Chinese party officials can be rude.
And but does China, in this kind of relationship, hold all the cards? Is it all one-way traffic? It seems to be presented as being the case.
I think they like everyone to think that way. But, you know, the deal in Manchester, the one signed in Sheffield, £1 billion worth just a few weeks ago, those deals are done. They're signed, sealed, delivered. And also, Britain offers so many bargains at the moment for Chinese billionaires. And they're not doing it for charitable purposes. They're making money. And, of course, with the pound lower at the moment, we do offer a lot of value for money as they see it. Does the government have the ability to send a signal to call us all of those billionaires off? Of course it does. But, you know, deals have been blocked in America, buying a Californian port. Deals have been blocked in Australia. Trade and business continues. What we're talking about here is sensitive infrastructure. The Chinese realise that. I mean, Theresa May has her doubts, but the Chinese have the dollars.
Angus, very, very interesting. Thank you very much indeed. Today was meant to be a big day for the South Korean technology company Samsung. Its new phone, the Galaxy Note 7, was due to be launched here in Britain, but instead it's suspended worldwide after several handsets caught fire whilst charging. The phone is meant to be a rival for Apple's upcoming iPhone upgrade, and more than 1 million have been sold in other countries after a launch full of fanfare. But a number of customers have since posted images online of fire-damaged phones. A faulty battery part is being blamed. When the images of Alan Kurdi washed up on a Turkish beach were flashed around the world exactly a year ago, politicians lined up to promise help for the hundreds of thousands of people fleeing war in places like Syria and Iraq. They did manage to secure an EU deal with Turkey to stem the flow of people heading for Europe, a journey Alan and his family had been trying to make. The deal led to a drop in numbers crossing into Greece from more than 200,000 last October to fewer than 2,000 in recent months. But that has far from solved the problem. As we reported last night, there are now 2.7 million refugees in Turkey, up 40% on a year ago. Governments in Europe had pledged to take some of those, but so far just 511 have been resettled. The UK separately pledged to take 20,000 Syrian refugees by 2020. So far, we've taken in barely 2,500. At the Home Office today, to mark a year since Alan's death, there were protests about what is seen as a lack of action from the UK and Europe. Earlier, I spoke to former Foreign Secretary David Miliband, who is now based in New York as head of a major humanitarian organisation dealing with refugees.
A year on from the terrible death of Alan Kurdi, the truth is that the refugee crisis is growing globally, not diminishing. 24 people every minute displaced from their homes by violence. And there's a desperate need to turn the words of politicians into substantive actions.
But if you take your hat off as a humanitarian worker or head of a humanitarian organisation and put your hat back on as a leading Western politician and diplomat, you can see the huge difficulties in trying to get a common agreed policy on the refugees, especially when everyone's policies on Syria is so divided anyway.
When I think back to the community I represented in South Shields, at the moment the UK government is committed to admitting about 6 refugees for every parliamentary constituency. I don't believe that's the limit of British generosity every year, nor do I believe that it's impossible for the United States, which has historically been a leader in refugee resettlement, to do much, much more. After all, Canada, the northern neighbour of the US, announced last year 25,000 refugees would arrive, and they were all there within 6 months.
As you say, I mean, within the United States, as well as here in Europe, there are a lot of politicians making policy based on a fear of refugees, that they could be somehow a fifth column for extremist groups. Has that made the situation more difficult in trying to press the case for refugees being allowed in more?
I think that the polarisation of political debate has made life much more difficult, above all for the refugees themselves, who do come to Western countries, but end up facing a mixture of fear on the one hand and compassion on the other. The UK has not yet met the commitment made by David Cameron at this time last year to admit 3,000 children, unaccompanied children, to the UK. The vetting is so significant that there are blockages in getting the required numbers of refugees, the pledged number of refugees into the country. And we always say, as an organisation that's committed to refugee resettlement, that we support effective security, but it has to be done in an efficient and an effective way.
The Syrian war is 5 years old. It seems that there are no signs of it easing in any way, shape or form. Do you think that politicians not so much have stopped listening, but find themselves unable to move the humanitarian case for helping the refugees forward anymore? I mean, you're in New York, there's a huge meeting in only a couple of weeks' time about the humanitarian situation in the Middle East and beyond.
I think it's particularly because of the ravaging war that's going on inside Syria and the difficulty of stopping it that we need to redouble our humanitarian efforts. The truth is that humanitarian action in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Europe, in the UK can offer some relief to some of those people who escape the war, and it's our duty to do so even while Western countries are finding it so difficult to adopt a coherent position that would do anything to bring the war inside Syria to an end.
Former Foreign Secretary David Miliband talking to me a little earlier. The Bishop of Grantham has tonight become the first Church of England bishop to publicly announce he is gay. Nicholas Chamberlain was consecrated to the office of bishop last November by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, who says he was fully aware of the bishop, that he was in a long-term relationship but celibate, and that is completely irrelevant to his office. The ever-deepening sense of racial division and tensions in the United States has been cast into the spotlight once again after a hugely successful and admired professional American football player, Colin Kaepernick, refused to stand or sing the national anthem. It's a revered tradition at US sporting events, from junior school games to the Super Bowl. But Kaepernick said he wouldn't sing the anthem of a country that has oppressed and mistreated black people. At first, he was heavily criticised, but now some teammates and rival players are doing the same.
Colin Kaepernick ran onto the field last night to boos and to jeers.
Hey, Kaepernick! Oh, Kaepernick!
Suddenly, one of America's best-known quarterbacks has become the lightning rod for this nation's great debate about race and policing. It was provoked by an action that was almost lost in the immensity of a football stadium. For there was Kaepernick sitting during the national anthem. His refusal to stand, he said, was a deliberate attempt to highlight how American justice is failing African Americans.
There's a lot of things that need to change. One specifically is police brutality. There's people being murdered unjustly and not being held accountable. Cops are getting paid leave for killing people. That's not right. That's not right by anyone's standards.
What so proudly we'd held.
In his next protest during his latest pre-season game, he knelt during the anthem. Another move that provoked immediate anger among many sports fans.
Disrespecting the national anthem, I don't think there's any excuse for that. And if you don't like our country, then get the hell out.
Kaepernick, don't ever disrespect my flag or my country or anybody that's in the service ever again, brother.
He's a spoiled brat.
It's a disgrace, to be honest with you. It's pretty much he's saying he doesn't care for our country.
In fact, protests from African American sportsmen and celebrities over racial issues have a long history. There was the Black Power salute by US medalists at the Mexico Olympics in 1968. And then Muhammad Ali's denunciation of the Vietnam War.
You won't even stand up for me in America for my religious beliefs, and you want me to go somewhere and fight, but you won't even stand up for me here at home.
And more recently, Beyoncé caused controversy during her Super Bowl performance, when her dancers were clothed in the black leather and berets associated with the Black Panther movement. In America, patriotism and respecting the stars and stripes and the national anthem are powerful and unifying forces. In the shadow of this Washington War Memorial, even those who want to highlight racial issues find Kaepernick's stance uncomfortable.
And this country has a deep problem with racism, and somebody needs to say something about it. I appreciate what Colin Kaepernick is doing. I appreciate it. And I just wish he would do it another way.
But if Kaepernick's aim was to ignite further debate, he has certainly done that. Robert Moore, News at 10, Washington.
And finally, the Paralympics have come a long way since the first Games back in 1948 at Stoke Mandeville Hospital in Buckinghamshire. Then it was 16 injured servicemen and women competing in one event, archery. In 5 days' time, the Rio Games begin with more than 4,000 athletes competing in 177 events. But Stoke Mandeville hasn't been forgotten, and tonight, to celebrate its status as the birthplace of the Games, a heritage flame was lit there by perhaps Britain's most celebrated Paralympian, Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson. 264 athletes will make up the Paralympic GB team, and if you've been watching News at 10 this week, you cannot fail to have been inspired by their stories. Tonight, we feature Gordon Reid, who was suddenly paralysed from the waist down at the age of 12. Now a champion wheelchair tennis player, he is competing in his third Games, hoping to finally realise his dream of Paralympic gold.
What he has in power, he matches in agility. And timing is everything. But wheelchair tennis takes twice the exertion. Gordon Reid is at the top of the game, something he modestly puts down to his Scottish heritage.
Yeah, maybe it is something in the water up here, but maybe it's just that kind of Scottish grit and determination as well.
Maybe throw it a bit harder against the ground so it bounces a bit higher.
Also an ambassador, he teaches about the skill involved in disabled sport. Gordon was just a few years older than these children when he lost the use of his legs. With no warning and no accident, a neurological condition changed his life as he knew it forever, just a week before his 13th birthday.
Lowest point was probably lying in a hospital bed near the start, when I was, didn't know what was going on, couldn't feel my legs. Had friends and family crying around me, everyone really upset, and it was just a kind of feeling of not knowing what was going to happen after that.
But after that traumatic time, wheelchair tennis was key to his recovery. The only difference to the able-bodied game is the ball can bounce twice before it's hit. Gordon's now British #1, and this year became the first ever wheelchair Wimbledon singles champion, which means 2 Scotsmen are at the top of the sport.
Andy Murray's a big role model for me. He's somebody I've followed since he was a youngster, competing at Wimbledon for the first times, and now he's at the top of the sport, and coming from the same country as me, and just his attitude towards his career, and his desire and his passion, I think is a great example to a lot of people out there.
The same can be said for Gordon himself, who says he's proof that life's not over because of a disability.
A message for any other kid who's in a similar situation to me is to just go out there and give it a go. Sometimes you don't know what you're capable of until you go and do it. My goal in Rio is to try and come home with 2 gold medals.
And bringing home his first Paralympic medal would top Gordon's glory year. Sally Lockwood, News at 10.
And you can watch the rest of our Ready for Rio series on our website. That's itv.com/news. That's all for tonight, but coming up over the weekend, Theresa May will arrive in China for that G20 summit. As well as trying to smooth relations over the Hinkley power plant deal, she'll also meet President Obama on Sunday. As we heard tomorrow, the government will announce details of a ban on the plastic microbeads found in beauty products. MPs were told how England football manager Sam Allardyce, his team play Slovakia on Sunday in a World Cup qualifier, their first game since that humiliating defeat to Iceland at Euro 2016. And on the River Thames, London will be set alight, or at least a wooden model will be, to commemorate 350 years since the London Great Fire swept through the city. Tom will be back on Monday, but from me and the whole team, have a great weekend.